Home Health Revealed. This is Chris Taylor. And Chris Taylor, I'm going to let you do your own intro and tell all about you. But man, I can't wait to dive into your new book. I just got a hold of a copy and have started reading it, and we're going to talk about it.
Wonderful. Yeah. So as Hannah has said, Chris Taylor, really, for the last 30 years have focused in the complete healthcare industry, but my real joy has been the last 22 years where I moved from the hospital environment to the care at home space and have loved being in home health and hospice and home care. And one of the things I realized in the book, it introduces a little bit about my mom, is that
Mhm.
I always find that you have people say, "Oh, I know about hospice."
Yeah.
You study hospice, you study home health, you do that. And then after my mom was a hospice patient, and I was a family member of a hospice patient, I could physically see the change from I know about hospice to I know hospice. And that was really a big impactful thing in me to where I could then work closer with organizations, with the vendors that try to help the providers themselves, having that actual walking in the shoes of
Yeah.
is always takes it to that next level of feeling. So I've done that for the last 22 years. I've been blessed to work with amazing organizations in the technology space, several different EMRs, also remote patient monitoring to be able to see how we can really bring benefits to patients. But really, over the whole time, from the time I got my master's degree from Brigham Young University till today, I've really studied and looked at how I can help bring benefits to the organizations that I work with and
Yeah.
that the individuals that I work in conjunction to, whether we're selling a service or a product, and the actual end users, and trying to build those relationships and create trust in all of those individuals.
And trust is a big topic. Now, I'll tell you in the beginning, I loved the story about your mom. I feel like she is somebody that I would have loved to have met. And she was a teacher. I come from education. She taught high school English. I taught middle school. So also English and math for me. But I feel like I can feel the person that she was through your book. I love the pictures that you put in your book as well. And can't wait because you took that experience and made it something to where you can apply this and bring in the knowledge, the experience that you've had professionally as well as your family, and help organizations get rid of some of their own toxicity and grow in their own, you know, in their mission, right? I think everybody,
Right.
you can look at it, an individual as being mission driven, you can look at it, your organization as being the same. So I have some questions for you,
Perfect.
but I want you to start a little bit by telling a story about your mom and who she was.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting because Gene always was driven to higher levels. So before I even came into existence, when she was going to college and she ended up getting engaged, but she still had a desire that she wanted to get her bachelor's degree. She didn't want to stop and just be a stay-at-home mom and raise children, which that was one of her top desires, but she
Ah,
still wanted to finish college. And so, this is early 60s, actually, and even 50s, that wasn't for women to go through and get their bachelor's degrees. It was some, even after they got married. But she even took it a step farther. She said, you know what? I'm going to go back and get my master's degree. And she got her master's in English and secondary ed. And again, if you look at the number of high school teachers, especially here in Utah, where we ended up moving to, not a lot of high school English teachers
mm-mm,
that had a master's degree. And it
right.
was just how she was. And she always did that through her life. She raised four boys on her own. Unfortunately, my father was killed when I was only 7 months old. And she again took that opportunity to still focus on her boys, to focus on education, to focus on teaching us integrity. I I remember, one time she got mad at me, threw a piece of toast at me. Well, probably one of the only times she got mad at me was because it was based on integrity, about the Taylor name and having trust. I mean, it goes all the way back to when I was a young teenager. And she was
Yeah.
always trying to teach us different things. I remember when I was 16 years old, I had a birthday party where I had some of my guy friends come over, and back then we had VHS tapes,
Yeah, we
and she
did.
stopped to pick up a movie for us to watch at my 16th birthday party, and she decided to pick up and bring home Joan of Arc. And that's just, I guess she just figured that us boys needed a lesson of women strong leaders, and just that was her. She continued through her life. Um, and unfortunately, early on, way before she should have, she ended up getting melanoma. But luckily, she always was watching. She always could see little changes. She got early diagnosis. She got it dealt with. It got cured. She was able to progress. Years later, after again touching thousands of people, she unfortunately got breast cancer. Again, luckily enough, early diagnosis. The team that she had did great at treating the root causes, not just the symptoms. And because of that, they were able to help heal her, and she was able to continue and grow. And then finally, it had come back and metastasized. And, again, she was supposed to only live a few months, but because of the early diagnosis, the properly treating the root causes, she was able to be with us another 9 months. And the exciting thing in her life, as she looked back, I remember sitting on her bed, sitting by her and having a conversation, and hearing her tell me about her joys in life and some of the regrets. One regret was she never wrote a book, which is one of the reasons I ended up finally sitting down and taking the time to write a book. But then she
Oh,
also talked about how she looked at the value of people and the
yeah.
importance of building that relationship with people, and always having that integrity, always being upfront. And I remember May 25th, 2010, and in Salt Lake, if you don't know Utah, usually you don't get snow uh, at the end of May. But one of her favorite things was a fresh snow, and looking outside the window and seeing it snow, and seeing back of her joy, not only at that point of her life, but throughout, is one of the motivating factors that I've taken away. And she was my best friend, and it was awesome to be able to spend, even though her life was shorter than I would have wished, the that extra 184,000 hours that I was able to spend with her and others were able to spend with her because of early diagnosis, treating root causes, and being healed, is what drove me to look at her life, and how it associates also with all types of organizations, not just
Yeah.
businesses, family relationships. It works, and the concepts really fall in line from what Gene taught me.
And your book is called The Corporate Cure, C.U.R.E.
Yes.
And you've taken that and made it into an acronym to apply across business. So I love how that story pushed you to really critically think about her extraordinary life. It sounds like everybody she touched was positively impacted, and to have a life where it's so meaningful. And I know that when you're on that side of hospice and then you sit at a kitchen table or wherever that was, for me that happened with my grandfather, and they're sliding that NOE over for signature, and all of the things that you thought you knew about hospice turn into a completely different experience where you're feeling walking through hospice with somebody that you love and care about so deeply. I think it makes the work that you and I do so much more meaningful and
Yeah.
relevant. We're able to approach
100%.
it differently. So I'm really excited to talk through this book with you and get it out to our listeners. And actually, I would love to do this book. I told you, with my own leadership team within our organization, just because I think there's such good stuff in here. But I'll start with some questions. Are you
Okay.
ready to
Yeah,
start with some questions? And
I love
I'll
it.
preface this with, I'm not all the way through the book, but you can, I'm I'm messing with it over here. It's on my desk. I've got my highlighter out. You've got quotes in there, you've got pictures. So it's very interactive, especially for somebody like me who likes to doodle and draw, and talking about all of the different points, and great quotes in there too from
Yeah, and what
various
I would
people.
say to you and any other reader is I'm all about aha moments and
Yeah.
epiphanies. So I'm glad you have a highlighter there. I'm glad you have a book, because I would say as you read it, if you have an aha moment, it maybe will triggers something that you remember from a previous experience, or,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, I have this type of situation, I'm going to try this, or an epiphany that you have while reading it, jot it down. And that way you can actually put those things into action, get a nice ROI from your
Yeah.
experience. And I'd also ask that drop me a note at the back of the book. There's a QR code. You could drop me a note. I love hearing people's aha moments. I love people hearing people's epiphanies, because that's how we all grow together as a community. So if you'll do that for me, I'd love it.
Yeah, I certainly will. So you talk about the organizational cancer, I'm using that kind of air quotes over here,
Right.
being something that can exist beneath the surface long before leaders really recognize it. And relating it to that touching story of your mom. So, what is the one symptom that leaders most often dismiss, overlook, that should really make them stop and investigate what's really going on here in my organization?
That's a great question, because a lot of times when people think, when leaders in organizations think of symptoms, they think about missing their annual growth number, or missing their
Yeah.
quarterly turnover rate, or what's even their monthly, missing a monthly KPI. But if you do that, the problem is, do you really want to wait a year or a quarter or even a month to figure out what's really going on? So the one symptom that I think leaders dismiss most often is a change in behavior. If you watch for changes in behavior, they will always come before that annual, that quarterly, that monthly issue. The connection is very, personal to me, because that's how my mom realized that she had cancer. She used to swim every morning at 4 a.m. She'd go down to the gym and swim laps. And
Wow.
she could swim, 40, 50, 60 laps and no problem. One morning she goes to the pool, gets in the water. By the time she makes her fourth turn of her lap, she's winded. She doesn't know why. She's able to swim 40, 50, 60 laps every day. But there was that little change.
Yeah.
And
And she
luckily, she
noticed.
realized it. She noticed
Uh-huh.
it. She went to the doctor that day, got her blood work back, and that's how she figured out. If she wouldn't have taken that, it, who knows how long it would, progressed, and then dealing with it would have been much more difficult. And so, if we look at our organizations, if we look at the people that we work with, because organizations are really no different than the human body, they're living, breathing
Hmm.
entities, right?
Made up of
And so
people.
when good people suddenly get quiet, when meetings lose their candor, when employees stop, bringing leaders their problems, when departments stop when they start blaming each other, when you hear things
Yeah.
like "why bother," or
Yeah.
"that's just how we do it here," or what my kids, if my kids were on here, they would tell me, if I ever hear the word "whatever," to
Ooh,
me,
yeah.
those are early behavioral changes that, as a
Yeah.
leader, my antenna go up and I'm like, something else is going on, right? One of the biggest mistakes is that leaders don't look at that, and don't ask that follow-up question. What's causing this? What's the root cause? Why is this team now not sharing with other teams? Why are they saying whatever? What is going on? And if engagement is, most companies, if engagement's down, let's launch an engagement initiative. Or if sales are down, let's push the sales reps harder. Turnovers up, let's increase recruiting. But that's just, treating the symptom, not really looking at, hey, let's diagnose what's really going on.
Hmm.
Let's ask the question, what changed? What's underneath these behavioral changes? I tell leaders all the time, when your best people get quiet, don't celebrate the lack of complaints, start
Yeah.
investigating. Because if your
Yeah.
best people aren't saying anything, something's going on. They're either looking for another job, or they're like coasting, they're sitting at home eating bonbons,
Yeah.
and like, I'm going to do whatever I can. So you got to look at those things. And that's really, where the corporate cure begins. It begins in, before the concept of diagnosing. I always, when I do book signings, one of the first things I try to write at the end of every signing is um, diagnose what's broken. That's step
Yep.
one. You got to get into it. And that's where it begins, because before you prescribe a cure, you have to make that right diagnosis. And so that's always step one. And I think, again, the symptom, if you look at slight behavioral changes, and what changes in these behaviors are out there, so you can really have conversations about it.
And I think you have to have leaders that care enough to take that pause and notice. And it may end up being nothing. You may have an off day, but taking the time to notice something that's off and then follow up with getting your blood work done. Let's just dive in a little bit, make sure we're good. I think that's also a key within your organization.
Yeah, and
So,
it is. If the leader, if you don't care enough about your people, I mean, one of the things that when I work with organizations, I talk to them about, you know, at least once a week, do a 15-minute check-in with your people. You know, doesn't have to be, you're not following up on them, you're not, just check in with them.
yeah,
If you do that, you know them better. And as you know them better and you care about them, these changes in behavior percolate to the top a lot easier for you, so you can see them earlier, so you're not waiting till that annual number isn't hit, and now you're way behind.
yeah, you're already looking in the rearview mirror,
Yep.
truly.
Yep.
Of the 5 areas that you talk about in your cures, so it's C.U.R.E.S for people who are listening, and it's a framework that you've built. So it's clarity, unity, readiness, execution, and sustainability. Which one do you think leaders most consistently underestimate and why?
I mean, the interesting thing is that what I find is that they all, one leads to the other, but if I had to choose one that where most organizations are most vulnerable, for sure would probably be unity. Leaders understand the strategy. It's it's
Hmm.
it's more objective. Leaders understand goals. Leaders understand KPIs. But I think the
Yeah.
dramatically underestimated area where leaders miss it and organizations miss it is how much organizational performance is dependent on trust, is dependent on unity. And if you miss that and you just focus on these objective measurements of all the other things, the underlying force that makes those things happen, if it breaks down, is where you're in trouble. I mean, I've seen executive teams with extremely smart people, with very successful people who individually are top of the charts, but collectively aren't nearly as effective as they should be. In fact, I was just doing a presentation working with a group of amazing people, wonderful leaders. And in that, I showed a video that talked about Belgian horses and how an individual Belgian horse by itself can pull 4,000 pounds.
Hmm.
But if you team two horses together that work together, that have this unity, that trust each other, on average, those two horses don't only pull 8,000, 4 plus 4 equals 8,
Double.
right? Normal
Yeah.
math, right? But actually, on average, when you put two Belgian horses together, they can carry up to 32,000, 4 times more. In fact, the world record is I think it's 53,000 pounds that two individual horses working together could pull. And so, if you look at the unity um, in an organization, that same thing can happen. 1 plus 1 can equal 7 in an organization when it's done right. Because if they don't trust each other, if they operate in silos, they protect information, they compete instead of collaborate, they avoid difficult conversations. None of those things are good for growth. None of those things are good for strength. All of those things are tearing away.
Yep.
And that's why inside of Unity, I talk so much about B-Rot. B-Rot's my favorite thing. If you've ever worked for me, if you've ever worked for an organization that I've consulted for, you'll know B-Rot. Building relationships of trust. It, to me, is the foundational rock that organizations have to be built upon, because trust isn't a soft leadership concept. To me, it's an operating system. I mean, if you think about, your computer, Your computer only is as good as that operating system that drives it. No different. And to me, trust is that operating system in an organization. When trust is high, communication gets faster, decisions get
Mhm.
faster, people take appropriate risks, problems surface earlier, accountability gets easier. When trust is low, everything gets expensive because everything is the opposite. And so having that as that operating system helps, because if you don't have it, meetings will multiply, emails multiply, approvals multiply, everything gets
Mhm.
longer, politics increases. Then you get into some of the
Yep.
fears like cancers we can maybe talk about later, but people start protecting themselves and organizations become very vulnerable. And so you have to have clarity to get unity, but you have to have that unity, because if you don't have unity, nobody buys into direction. As I said before, they all kind of lead one to the other. Because then with unity, without readiness, you're not going to do anything. Without readiness and having readiness, but without execution, you're going to get a lot of activity without results. And then
Yes.
again, at the end, you can execute, but if you don't have sustainability, great, you have a great 6 months, but you fall back, where you started. But at the end of the day, if you look at all of the five different areas, clarity, unity, readiness, execution, and sustainability, for sure to me, unity is the one that if you don't have, your organization is never going to achieve the potential it can.
Ooh, I like
4,000
that.
plus 4,000 equals 32,000.
I like that. I really do like that because if you're pulling in the same direction, you're going to be able to go further faster if you're unified in that approach. One of the organizational cancers that you identify is fear-based leadership. But fear can also sometimes produce short-term results. So, how does a leader recognize when accountability has crossed the line into fear? And then what does healthy accountability look like?
I mean, the crazy thing is that's why fear-based leadership is so dangerous. It's
Mhm.
why in the corporate care, I listed as the number one cancer of the list of seven, is because to me, you're exactly right. Fear can produce great results.
Mhm.
Um, that's the dangerous thing about fear-based leadership, is that it can work, at least temporarily. And that's
Yes.
the issue. That fear can make somebody hit a number. Fear can make somebody work on a Saturday. Fear can make somebody stop questioning the boss and just go along with everything. But unfortunately, fear produces compliance, not commitment. And compliance versus commitment never wins. Eventually, the organization pays for it in the compliance. People stop telling the truth. They hide their mistakes. They manipulate numbers. I mean, I don't know if anybody who manages a sales team has ever said, oh, I did 80
Yeah.
calls this week. And then when you dive into it, they really did 20. And what you find out is they are too afraid. They're afraid if they said why they only did 20, that they'd lose their job. But
Right.
maybe there's an organizational underlying problem of why they could only do 20. Maybe the CRM is not very good. Maybe, there's a lot of different reasons, but they're too afraid to talk about it. So you couldn't get to the root cause. They avoid taking risks. Here's one of the biggest downsides is that if you look at your team of employees and you break them into thirds, you got your bottom third. It's like if they leave, it's not going to really affect anything. It's probably healthy for the organization. You got your middle third and you got your top third. Unfortunately, the individuals that leave at a higher propensity when under a fear-based leader are your strongest employees, the ones you don't want to leave. And the people who remain become more exceptionally good at managing what the leader is forcing instead of solving the real problems. If your employees are afraid of telling you about the problem, look in a mirror. You're probably the problem itself. You have a leadership problem. So the question on accountability, what how can we still be accountable without looking at fear?
Mhm.
And here's something I when working with different leaders and mentoring and working with organizations, one of the questions I tell them, a quick, easy question as a leader to ask is, um, when, ask yourself, when someone on my team makes a mistake, is their first instinct to bring it to me, or is it to hide it from me? Because this tells me an enormous amount of my leadership style, the culture
Mhm.
of the organization, and all that. Because healthy accountability is actually very demanding, and it does require a lot. But the expectations are clear, the ownership is clear, the standards are high, results matters, consequences exist. So all of those things are true also inside of building healthy accountability. But the difference is
Mhm.
that people can tell the truth. It all goes back to
Trust and be
unity
rats.
and trust, right? It's this
Yeah.
circular thing. I can say, Chris, you missed the number. Let's understand why. Um, you know, what you own, what needs to change, what are you going to do next to make this different? That's accountability. That's saying, Chris, here's what happened, here's what you're responsible for. What are you going to do? What help do you need from me? What help do you need from the organization? So you're not relieving them of their responsibility, but you're sitting down and helping, leading them to be able to look at, okay, what do I need? If I ask that question, fear says, instead of that sitting down and working, if I'm leading by fear, I sit Chris down and I say, Chris, you better hit that number or else you're going on a PIP. You're getting fired, right? And so exact same situation. Chris isn't hitting his number. Chris isn't doing what he's supposed to be doing. One, how you lead and how you pose it is more of an accountability standpoint. The
Hmm.
other is just straight fear. One develops a person, the other tries to control the person. The overall goal is, as I look at fear versus accountability, is accountability creates ownership in
Yes.
the individual, right? Fear creates compliance. I want to have a team full of owners, a team full of people that look at that company as they are owners. If this was my own company, I would do X, not I'm doing X because Chris told me I had to do X. So I hope that answers and looks at fear versus accountability, because it's not saying you have to be nice and everybody's best friend and you have to give in and all of that. You still need to
No.
have them accountable, but how you present it and how they feel, how that trust, if they've seen activities that weaken their trust, people without cause get fired. I mean, those type of things
Hmm.
undermine helping individuals be accountable versus compliant.
And I think maybe you implied this as well, but compliance versus commitment, to me, commitment also requires critical thinking, because then your employee or your person that you're working with has to step up in a way of, okay, this is mine. What am I going to do? And they have the freedom and the ability to utilize, because they're not acting out of fear. I think fear can also cloud critical thinking, because then you're afraid to do something that might fail. And some of the best learning opportunities come from being allowed to fail.
Right. 100%. And I mean, just when you said that, you created a new math with your comment. In that situation where a leader takes away the response or opportunity for their
Mhm.
employee to use critical thinking, now your math is 1 + 1 = 1, right? Because the employee is not doing their own thinking. They're not bringing
Mhm.
anything to the table. All they're doing is doing what they're told to do, what the leader says. And so you're 100% right. I mean, I can tell you that the times where I've actually been on an executive team leading, one of the things that I always look at is if there were times where we had a deadline, it wasn't a normal thing, and I started getting phone calls from team members saying, "Hey, what can I do this weekend? Do we need to get out and pull an all-nighter?" Then I as a leader, like, you know what? Check the box. I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
They respect me. They want all of us to succeed. They want that 4,000 plus 4,000 equal 32,000. They want that experience. They have that ownership. They're committed, right? And you hit the nail on the head. If you don't allow that and you take that away from people, it gets down to why have other people. They just become a cost instead of an investment, right?
Mm.
Um, it's interesting. Listen to when you talk to people and they're talking about human resources. If the person and I unfortunately it's now stuck in my head, so I do this all the time. If I hear an individual, a leader, talking about their team as, oh yeah, my, they cost me X, or, and it's all about a cost instead of an investment. To me, it helps me see where their mindset is on the value of the individuals, the value that they're bringing from their commitment, from adding to the company versus it doesn't matter because I'm going to tell them what to do and they're going to do what I say.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes a difference in how that person feels when they're approached
Yeah.
that way.
Because then you want it not only for yourself. I mean, human nature is we want to be accepted. We want to, when we look in the mirror, feel good about ourselves. We want accomplishments.
Mhm.
That's why we love it. When we win a race and we get that gold medal, that was something we wanted.
Mhm.
And we strive for. So it's normal human nature. And so if we don't allow that to take place in our teams because of fear-based leadership, um, then we take all of those benefits away.
Agree. Yeah. This is I'm thinking through my own leadership and styles and things, and I feel like I'm learning a lot through this book. And as a leader, a lot of times we can think about how we are, and our self-perception can be one thing. I think there's a way, and I know you work with organizations, and I got the opportunity to listen to some of your presentation at we were just at the Can Time conference together. So that was really cool for me to get to hear you as a speaker talk through some of these things with some Q&A and real life scenarios, because this isn't just a book that you read and you feel good and you highlight and put on the shelf. This is something that if you're really willing to be vulnerable as a leader and think through, and then even taking that a step further, having you come in, and I know you do this with organizations to really help almost it's work therapy, it's organizational
Mhm.
therapy, and identify even how employees feel about a leader but it does take vulnerability as a leader, I think, to go through something like that. So you've spent more than, I'll say, 30 years
Yep.
in executive leadership, being able to really see some of these from different angles. If you could sit down with the younger version of yourself, let's say even 20 years ago, and tell that Chris one thing about building an organization, building a sales team that can actually sustain growth and can sustain success, what would you tell him?
Oh, yeah, I think I'd tell the younger Chris Taylor one to go to the gym more. No, um, no, I looking at that, I'd be like, you know what? You're going to spend a lot of your time in your career focusing on results, focusing on, that results absolutely matter. I started off my first job out of college was working for Michelin Tire Corporation at their corporate office in Greenville, South Carolina. It was in a sales area. And so, starting out in a sales executive, everything was numbers, numbers, numbers.
Yep.
And so that's kind of the mindset that I got on, how do you sell more product? How do you do more X? But it's more chasing results. Um, but what I've realized since, and what I would tell the younger Chris Taylor is don't focus um, on chasing results. Obviously, results matter, they absolutely matter. But sustainable results are almost always, and now that I've seen over the last 30 plus years, sustainable results are almost always the byproduct of relationships. Spend less time, building transactions. Spend less time doing that and spend more time building trust, building those relationships of trust as you're in that process of selling or whatever your job is. Taking care of a patient. You know, you're a nurse, you're a clinician, you're a CFO, taking care of the books. Obviously, those items are important. Those actual tasks are important. Hitting those results are important. But if you want sustainability,
Yes.
the S in cures, right? If you want that, I would tell my younger self, spend less time focusing on the transaction and more time on building trust. Because, you know, I always thought that, you know, a great sales person, you know, sold products. I don't believe that anymore. To me, great salespeople, great employees, great team members build relationships of trust. Um, I probably thought that great leaders had all the answers. I don't believe that anymore. I think that great leaders create environments where people are willing to tell the truth. And then because they're willing to tell the truth, the great answers percolate to the top, and the leader
Mhm.
and their team and the whole group then go together. There's something I teach and I talk about. I'm a scuba diver, so I love being in the water. And with scuba diving, buoyancy is a huge part of scuba diving. You want to be neutrally buoyant, so you're not going up, you're not going down, you're just cruising where you want to be. And so I look at in organizations, there's a buoyancy issue. If you think about a buoy on top of the
Mhm.
water where it floats, and unfortunately, if you're in an organization where everybody else is pushing down on the buoy so they can be up higher and drowning whoever that buoy is, not a good situation. If everybody and the great leaders create this environment where nobody's trying to push the buoy down so they can be higher, but they're all arm in arm, buoying themselves up so they're all buoyant and all safe and all growing and all, you know, progressing, that's what you want. And I probably thought building a successful organization was primarily about hiring the right people, setting the right goals, driving the execution. You know, that's, you know, adding back to my bit. Look, Brigham Young University, shout out to you. Great. Marriott School of Management, great program. But as I think back to some of the classes there, they're focused on, you know, in your HR class, it's about hiring the right people. Here are the questions to ask.
Mhm.
Here's how you hire the right people. Okay. And this, you know, in your strategy class, is about here's how you set your strategic goals and driving execution. There really wasn't a lot. I can't remember the B-Rot, you know, 303. Maybe I
Yeah.
need to go back
No.
and create that and become a professor. But that's what it is. I mean, obviously those things matter. Hiring great people, setting goals, driving execution, obviously those matter. But what I've learned um, is that if you don't build the trust beneath it, success becomes incredibly fragile. If you don't have that trust, the great people that you have will leave. If you don't have that trust, that respect with the team, the goals that have been set won't matter because everybody's at 50% anyways. You can try to drive execution, it's not going to happen. So again, to me, that rock, you know, the wise man builds his house upon a rock.
Yep.
To me, a wise organization builds its house upon the trust rock. And if they do that, that's where we'll be. And that's why in the corporate cure, in the unity section, so much of that is spent on B-Rot, is spent on building relationships with trust. We talked about it earlier. We talked about it again. I was just at a conference, and one of the great speakers there was talking about strong, successful organizations. And I watched his entire presentation, and at the end, I sent them a note and said, "Do you know what one word that was most used in all of your slides throughout your entire piece?" And he said, "Yeah, trust." And so to me, it was like, okay, he and I didn't talk, you know, we didn't like do our presentations together, but it all came back to that. So it helped me realize that that's what, you know, everything's about. Because whether you're talking about leadership, employees, customers, partnerships, sales. People buy from people they trust. People want to work with people they trust. People want to make people they trust look better, and help
Mhm.
them grow. Um, People follow people they trust. How many
Mhm.
times have you seen an organization where a great leader leaves, and then over the next 6 months, there's this exiting of people to go where they're at? Maybe it's a year after their non-compete's gone, or not
Yeah,
solicitation's gone.
that trickle
But
effect.
people follow people they trust, and people will go. And this is one thing I learned early, is that people will go through incredible, difficult changes if they have a leader they trust.
Mhm.
If your organization is going to be going through an M&A, if an organization is going through a big thing like an EMR, new EMR implementation, it's going to change your entire life at work. Whatever that difficult thing is, what I've seen over and over and over again is that people will go through these incredible, difficult times of change with leaders they trust. So if
Mhm.
I could give my younger self one piece of advice, it would be, don't just build the business, build the relationships that make the business sustainable. Because most organizations don't have a people problem. They have an environment problem. Good people are placed inside of unhealthy systems, eventually begun producing unhealthy behaviors.
Yeah.
Trust is a cure of several of the cancers. Again, in the book, 7 are laid out that I've commonly seen the most. Unfortunately, there's more than 7 out there, but to look at the top 7 and throughout, trust is a key piece. And one of the things that in putting all of this together is not only to diagnose, as I said, if we can diagnose what's broken. So that's the first step.
Mhm.
2, look at aligning what matters and figuring out the root causes so we can build something that lasts, sustainability. And so in there, as I look at each of the 7 cancers, I look at, okay, let's diagnose first. And then at the end, we look at the treatments. What can we do to treat and fix? What are some of the underlying easy, low-hanging fruits that we can do that will help fix these root causes of these cancers?
And you talked about how some of them are quick fixes. They're easy, but for some you really do have to kind of put together that treatment plan and go through hard things. And you really mentioned change management as a big idea if you're walking through an EMR. And I always like the picture of it's actually a grief model where you talk about change management. And I have a copy of one that I've used in several different conversations. It kind of looks like a dragon in the way that it's drawn out. And in the belly of the dragon, when there's indigestion as you're going through change, leaders who have trust built up within their organization can actually get through that hard part of the change more successfully and faster. You can get through it quicker to get up to your new status quo. That's better than the old status quo with your
Yeah.
new implementation if you have that trust. And so as a leader, that's a superpower that you have, but it's not one that you can develop quickly and it's a character trait really.
No, I love that. I'm gonna have to have you send me the picture of the
Send you the
dragon.
dragon.
Yeah, send me the
The
dragon.
indigestion dragon.
Yes, I would love to see that. I love learning. Again, goes back to Gene. 360 degrees goes back to Gene. The interesting thing is, if you think about, and I don't know, maybe you thought this out, um, because you're that smart. But as I was thinking about the questions that you thought about asking, it really fits. I mean, the first question, is all about diagnosing.
Hmm.
Something isn't right, don't ignore the symptoms. That first question really dove into diagnosis. Your second question, looking at asking about how do you use a C.U.R.E.S framework, right? So you're
Hmm.
identifying those root causes. And then your question 3 was about fear, accountability. How do you treat it, right? That's what
Yeah.
we talked about with number three. And then your last one was looking at sustainability. What would you tell that 20-year-old self, right? So without even, I don't, maybe you set it up like that on purpose, but it perfectly fits into, diagnosing what's broken, treating the root causes, healing the organization, because that's really what it's all about. If you can do those things, um, no matter what, there in every organization, there's, like you said, those low-hanging fruits. There's things that are there, like my
Yes.
mom's melanoma, that easily can be done. Maybe it's that one toxic employee. And if you don't get rid of that toxic employee, I promise you that toxic employee will turn into a toxic culture. They will start when you're having an important meeting, they're the ones that are on
Mhm.
their phones texting other team members, oh, this is so dumb,
Yeah.
whatever. They're the ones that use that whatever, and it
Yes.
gives me PTSD. But yeah, those are the things that every organization have going on. And the good news is that a lot of them, if the time is taken and the focus is put on it, you can find them. You can see those slight behavioral changes that we talked about at the very beginning, and look at how we can do those early diagnoses and treat. And again, that to me is why I got Gene for an extra 21 years, and is
Yes.
why, again, to come full circle, why I decided to write uh, this book. There's more to come.
Yeah, I
Um,
want to hear about what's next because I think I overheard you talking about maybe a next book. And I'm curious as to where your mind is as an author for what you want to write next.
Yeah, I mean, so for sure, there's more to come. What I've realized as I look at the framework and again, this was a 4-year process of putting this book together, many flights on airplanes, many notes on Delta napkins,
I
that
love that.
became cures. If you think of
Yeah.
clarity, unity, readiness, execution, and sustainability, it really, that framework fits into several things. So, two different projects I'm working on right now is one is expanding um, the corporate cure into the cures series. So, for example, the family cure. Every family is basically an organization within
Yeah.
itself. Whether you're in early stages in a relationship, maybe that's moved to a marriage, maybe that's moved to having kids in a family. But if you look at a family and using those areas, it really, the book, will explore how, couples and families create clarity around the expectations, values, and roles, finances, parenting, those areas
Mhm.
inside of a family, how they can develop unity together, how their relationships can be stronger, how that trust, everything we talked about, building relationships of trust should happen between partners, should happen between spouses, should happen between parent child and child parent, bi-directionally. It's not, again, fear-based parenting doesn't work, just like fear-based leadership doesn't work, right? So a lot of those same things. So the central idea about being healthy families don't happen by accident. They're built intentionally, similar to healthy businesses. So that's one. The Campus Cure is kind of a prequel to the Corporate Cure, helping
Okay.
individuals in colleges and universities before you get that first job. I asked myself the question, where was Chris Taylor before he took that job with Michelin Tire Corporation? How could I have been in a better position if I looked at um, clarity, unity, readiness, execution, and sustainability in what I was doing when I was in college? Again, learning about building
Mhm.
relationships, my mentors. How many college students really search and ask for people to be their mentors? How
Yeah.
many are spending time learning with different people, addressing, knowing my career preparation? A lot of times, and what I've seen, and as I've talked to individuals in college, is they take their classes and then they just go to like a job fair and they'll
Mhm.
interview with anybody, right? And they haven't done anything to prepare themselves to be more ready for the job or the career that they really want to be doing. So Cures works perfectly with that group. And so that's one of the, areas that I've already started working on expanding, using the framework in different areas before we move into our careers and corporate life. While we're in our careers and corporate life, we have this other whole life, with another whole organization that we're with, whether it be
Mhm.
relationships, marriage, family. And then the last is that I've been so moved by the conversations and the commit and the comments that people have made after they've read and after I've worked with organizations on the unity section, and especially
Mhm.
B-Rot. There will be a deeper dive into B-Rot, and B-Rot being that rock to build organizations upon. You know, building that
Yes.
rock, that then everything, again, whether the organization be a business, whether the organization be your family, whether the organization be a community that you live in, that
Mhm.
building relationships, trust, that trust needs to be that rock that's built. So those are some of the projects I'm already working on, and we'll see how they come about. And I'm looking forward to continuing to help organizations. Again, I think that the genetics that were passed on for Jean was, how can I help people? When she created that first women's center at Brigham Young University, a place for women to go, whether they had grades that they were struggling, maybe they were just homesick. First time they moved away from
Mhm.
home, they were freshmen at a campus of 40 plus thousand people. You
Yes.
can get lost. And her creating this place, or maybe it was, somebody more tragic and a victim of sexual assault, whatever the case was, she
Yes.
wanted to create a safe place, a place that individuals could go so she could help them get help. And that's one of the reasons of that I've loved of leaving the corporate world and starting Tailored Growth, writing the book. It allows me to do exactly that, more laser guided. So it really brings joy.
Well, I don't want to get us too off course. I know we're about done, but while I was thinking about what you were saying, your mom created at Brigham Young. Side note, I think you should, once you get the campus cure, that'll be your intro course at Brigham Young that you can teach. But what your mom created was a place of trust. And what trust does is it creates belonging, and it's human nature to want to belong. So when you're going somewhere new, life has changed, season of life has changed, new job, whatever that looks like in where you're at in your life today, you are looking for people you can trust.
1,000,000%.
And you're looking because we want to belong. And when we trust someone or an organization, we know we belong there because we feel safe there. We're always seeking that safety. Okay, before I let you go though, where can somebody find you or find information about you if you have an organization? If you want to reach out to Chris to get more information, if you want to find the book, where can we do all those things?
Awesome. So the book is being sold currently on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, Walmart, all of the places where you'd want to find a book. Um, Go to any of those pages, search the Corporate Cure Chris Taylor, it'll pop right up. Order it. After you read it, I'd love everybody that has an opportunity to look at it. Go back to that
Mm,
source and Amazon, wherever, and leave a review. Be
yeah,
honest. I'm,
leave
I'm
five
not saying only
stars.
leave good ones, do all that. Um, to find me, again, you can go to my website that has information more on the book, has more information on the services I do, whether it be keynote speaking, coming out and doing leadership retreats, whatever it is. Tailored Growth, Taylord Growth,
Taylord. I always say
Tailored
Taylord
Growth.
in my
Yes. My last name Taylor, but I wanted to make it very individual to what individuals need. So it's tailored, but Taylord growth.com. Or you can send me an email, ctaylor@tailoredgrowth.com. And I love hearing what people are doing, how I can help. It's all about working together to elevate everybody around us.
yes. Thank you so much, Chris. This has been amazing.
Thank you, Hannah.
Okay.